It is said, when darkness fills the world, 4 warriors of light shall come. Or so the prophecy goes in the lands of Cornelia. Enter Jack, a warrior with no memories yet one singular goal: to kill chaos. He is shortly joined by 2 other warriors in Jed and Ash, who also share the same goal. All 3 hold a crystal that is pitch black, yet has brought all of them together. After being tasked to fight many different monsters, they confront the king in the hopes of finally fulfilling the goal of defeating chaos. They finally are granted access to the Chaos Shrine, where they say chaos resides. What they find there is a knight who bore resemblance to a warrior described by the princess as Garland. Upon defeating this enemy, it is revealed to be neither Garland nor Chaos, but another warrior named Nioh, who claimed the legend of Chaos to be a story of myth. However, Jack doesn't buy it. Nioh also holds a black crystal similar to the ones the other 3 hold, and joins their party to aid in their quest to defeat Chaos. The Kingdom of Cornelia believes them to be the warriors of light that the prophecies foretold, and tasks them with fixing the crystals across the land which have been drained of their respective energies. Believing that this would rid the world of chaos, Jack and his party set out on a venture. Stranger of Paradise: Final Fantasy Origin, developed by Team Ninja, tells its own version of the original Final Fantasy's tale, with a more Souls-like spin on gameplay this time around. Instead of turn-based RPG combat, the game opts for a more action-oriented style of combat, similar to Team Ninja's other Souls-like series, Nioh. Unlike most other Souls-likes, there are no actual levels and stats to upgrade for your characters. Instead, focus is placed on equipment levels along with the jobs you unlock and equip during your playthrough. You select locations on the world map and choose whichever mission you wish to complete, with more missions being unlocked as the story progresses. Unlike other Souls-like games, Strangers has multiple difficulty options you can choose for the main story, with harder difficulties being unlocked in the post-game. The post-game lets you redo previous missions at higher difficulty levels and allows players to collect better items and equipment, along with further leveling up the classes you unlock. The DLC adds further additional content in the form of story content, additional mechanics, and higher difficulty levels. With these changes to the traditional Final Fantasy formula, the Strangers of Paradise stand up on its own. Is it more than the funny chaos meme game? Most importantly, is it any good? For transparency, a copy of the base game was provided by our PR network, while I paid out of pocket for the DLC. Also, I played this game on my PC with the specs listed in the description. Let's find out what works in Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin in the good. The depth to the combat knows no ends, as there are a variety of different options you can take, as well as builds you can work towards. Some of the fun I had in Stranger of Paradise was unlocking the various jobs available to Jack. You start off with an assortment of basic jobs you are able to experiment with and find which ones are to your liking. Each job class has different gear it can use. As you level up each job class, you unlock different buffs and skills tied to that class. Later in the skill tree, you'll find additional job classes that can be unlocked if certain requirements are met. Unlocking those new classes will grant access to new skills to acquire. Unlocking the higher job classes is certainly a joy, but let's say you grew fond of one of the lower tier job classes and wanted to use it more. Well, once you reach the post game, you'll be able to further strengthen your previous classes with the anima crystals you collect to raise stats in each of those classes to make them stronger. On top of that, in the post game, you will unlock higher difficulties of the missions you complete, where you can also raise the job's level cap to strengthen it further. I really like how open this game's combat opportunities are, as you have a plethora of different jobs and skill sets you can take advantage of until you find the ones that fit your needs. Often, you'll find yourself against enemies who may be stronger than you. Thankfully, you do not need to grind in this game, at least in the traditional sense, as your level and stats are tied to the equipment you wear and job classes. The equipment drops aplenty from enemies and levels, and you find yourself struggling against some enemies. Using equipment they drop can quickly help you even out the odds. Many of the weapons you come across will also have their own unique skills that you can make use of in combat. Another thing to pay attention to is the job affinity each piece of equipment grants, which can grant additional properties to your party, such as stat boosts and extensions on certain buffs. Mixing and matching equipment to unlock the job affinity bonuses and making good use of your job systems and weapon skills are the keys to success. You're able to save your job class builds you create, so if there's another class and build you want to try, you are safe to do so without fear of losing your current build. I did enjoy taking time to make my own equipment builds that fit my playstyle, though this came with many bizarre design choices that I'll talk about later. The story of the original Final Fantasy was a fairly simple one, so I appreciate how Strangers of Paradise takes the story elements and some characters from that game and expands upon them to give more depth. Bosses that were easy one-offs become important side characters that have heavy involvement in the game's overall plot. Final Fantasy I fans will find a lot to love from the callbacks to Final Fantasy I, but other Final Fantasy entry fans up to 15 will also find some interesting callbacks to their games. Many of the levels are structured and themed off of iconic locations from previous Final Fantasy games. Two that stuck out to me were Mount Gold, which according to in-game lore, was modeled after the Fire Cavern from Final Fantasy VIII. The other one was the Cavern of Earth, which was clearly inspired by the Tomb of Wraithwall from Final Fantasy XII. These levels also contain new arrangements of those tracks used in those games, adding to the fan service this game exudes. Even some of the bosses are pulled from classic Final Fantasy bosses such as the Iron Giant, Behemoth, and even Ultima Weapon. These bosses can provide quite a challenging experience, but there is a sense of satisfaction from overcoming the odds like in other Souls-like games. That said, if you really only want to experience the story without dealing with the frustrating difficulty, there are difficulty options available to you. Heck, the lowest difficulty setting is called Story, so you won't need to worry about getting locked out on any of the plot. I like how the plot really starts to pick up in the second half of the journey, where it begins to deviate heavily from Final Fantasy I's plot, and the secrets about this world and what's going on begin to unravel. Despite this though, Jack will still find a way to skip it.
A foolish dream, no matter how much you wish it, that season will never come. It will remain a dream so long as I live. Who I am, I don't give a fuck who you are. I am Lich, and I shall devour all that is good.
Speaking of Jack, he's one of the biggest highlights to Stranger of Paradise by how little he cares about things and focuses on killing chaos. This mindset has certainly brought a lot of eyes onto this game, though thankfully Jack isn't a one-note character the whole time. Despite a straight-to-the-point mindset, he does show care for his friends and the people around him. His inner conflict with the memories he recovers against his one true goal makes him a more complex character than meets the eye, and the DLC helps flesh him out a bit more. Speaking of the DLC, I like how it adds additional classes on top of the ones available in the base game, and each DLC chapter adds a plethora of new mechanics to play with. The DLC gives players new opportunities to further level up and enhance their favorite classes with new items, but the biggest draw is the subclasses that become available. These subclasses, Ultima and Evocation respectively, grant their own traits to all the classes you previously unlocked, adding further ways to plan out your build. With the second DLC, you are able to merge equipment together and retain some of the effects of the equipment used in the process in the new piece created. With the third DLC, you are then able to duplicate your equipment if you find something you like but want to give it different stats. I also really like how the DLC chapters not only include nods to staple Final Fantasy characters, but also adds ties to another Final Fantasy love letter game, Dissidia Final Fantasy. One last thing is that after you complete the base game's story, you gain access to Extra Mode, which grants infinite stamina and MP to tackle the harder difficulties with. There is a trade-off where the items you get after finishing missions on this mode diminish, but it does help you overcome the odds better. That said, at times, Extra Mode will feel like a necessity with how painfully difficult the game becomes in the post-game, which is a good segue into the bad. I mentioned before how there's no need to grind in the game as your stats are based on the equipment you have along with your job level. It's also good that enemies you fight drop equipment that's based on the enemy's relative strength, so you never feel roadblocked during the course of the main story. That said, this leads into one of my biggest issues with this game, where it feels like spending time on making a special build for yourself is a waste of time. There are several factors leading to this. For starters, enemies drop equipment upon death. A lot of equipment to where it feels like you're beating up pinatas more than actual enemies with the amount they drop. This seems to be a consistent problem with Koei Tecmo Soulslikes that probably isn't getting solved anytime soon, since even their most recent game, Wolong, also contains pinata enemies. Eventually feels like with every preceding level, you would need to spend time updating your build, but then you get better equipment on top of that during missions, making the whole thing feel pointless. You can save builds you make, thankfully, but then another problem starts to rear its ugly head. You also need to put equipment on your party members if you don't plan on tackling this game solo. Online can be an option, if you can find anyone. I couldn't seem to locate anyone during my playthrough, though I have a theory on why that is that I'll bring up later. Factoring in your party's equipment makes creating builds even more tedious, where most of the time you will opt to let the game optimize your party's loadout to save time. For some reason, by default, you cannot optimize each character's loadout separately, you can only do them together. The game never tells you that you can set the optimize toggle to character by character in the options menu, though many of the options in the menus of Stranger of Paradise feel overly complicated to your average player. There's another mechanic in the game called Dismantle, where at the end of missions you can choose which items you wish to dismantle for materials used to level up equipment. With the amount of items you pick up during missions, it can feel tedious to look over and select which items to dismantle and which ones to keep. Thankfully, there's toggles and options on which items to automatically dismantle, but also filter which ones you pick up. It's just that the game never will explain this, and I only figured this out by chance when I already reached the post-game! It also doesn't explain very well which parameters do what, though this is a consistent problem with most mechanics this game has that goes deeper than a kiddie pool. I hate how there's no way to upgrade items or access a smithy during missions or even be able to dismantle at the save cubes. Eventually your inventory will get full and you'll need to get rid of items, and it's a shame that you can't do all those things at the cube checkpoints. You can only do it back on the world map, so make sure you store your junk items prior. While we're talking about junk items, let's talk about accessories. The accessories felt very useless during the main story since the stats they provided were negligible. However, once I got the DLC for Stranger of Paradise, suddenly I started getting much better quality accessories, leading me to believe these are locked behind the DLC that got added to the game with. These accessories should just be available in the base game if they're even going to drop at all. Remember how I brought up that I couldn't find any players online before? Well, after buying the DLC, I suddenly was able to find some online rooms to join, which makes me suspect there's a bug which prevents you from playing with others unless you had the DLC. Then there's the classes and weapons added from the DLC too. Some classes being locked, I can understand, since unlocking them is based on the DLC story progression. But the fact that you can see icons for certain weapons in your battle settings, but never actually see those weapons until you gain access to the DLC can be infuriating. Then again, it might be better not to throw in more things for the player to take note of, considering how much stuff in terms of battle options there are in this game. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, since it gives players a plethora of different ways to tackle the main game without needing full knowledge of every mechanic available. It's when you reach the DLC where this becomes a problem, since all the enemies become damage sponges and the game expects you to have full knowledge of all the mechanics and prepare accordingly. Did I also mention the post-game in the DLC introduces even more mechanics on top of the hill and mechanics already in the base game? It feels like you need a master's degree to fully comprehend all the stats you can enhance in your favorite class and how to best optimize it all. All of this can make combat feel too hectic with trying to remember everything combined with how fast-paced it is. It's much easier to just attack with your weapons and job skills while using Soul Burst to parry rather than utilizing the other skills you unlock by upgrading your job class, and thankfully you can make it through the main story with that method. Even though every area is fairly linear, it would still help if this game had a minimap of some sort, since many areas can look the same and it can be easy to start heading in the wrong direction. Some cases you need to loop back to previous areas after you unlock a nearby door or gate, so having a minimap would help a lot for those missions. I mentioned before how I thought Jack's character, while hilarious in how no nonsense he was, felt very layered with how he was concerned about the well-being of his friends. Even though that's true, I wish we could have gotten more screen time and interactions with his friends since we get so little of it in the main story. We only learn more about these characters in the missives shown before you enter a mission that has to do with that character or in the short flashback scenes. Otherwise, this is mostly Jack's story to shine in. Speaking of the story, it starts out interesting but really takes a back seat towards the middle once the journey for the Four Crystals begins. The story gets more interesting in the last third of the game when more details about the world gets revealed. However, this still leaves no time to expand on Jack's friends or Jack himself. The game also has a feature where you can talk to the citizens of Cornelia, but it's done in the most unintuitive way where you need to load in the environment before you can talk to anyone there. What makes this extra annoying is that there's no reason for the game to make you load in the environment every time when you don't get to explore it at all. They should have either made Cornelia a hub world or made the citizens' dialogue viewable from the world map screen. Not to mention, they don't have anything interesting to talk about until later in the game. This next section will cover the DLC because, boy, oh boy! Depending on how you've been playing the game, this will either be an exciting experience or a completely miserable one. I said before that grinding is not needed since you can simply get stronger items from defeated enemies. This rings both true and false, since now the game expects you to have deeper knowledge of the game's mechanics and grind for items to level up your classes and equipment since the enemies are far stronger than in the base game. I really dislike how tough they made them since now they feel like damage sponges where it doesn't feel like you're doing much damage to them. Meanwhile, they can take you out in about 1 to 2 hits. This can be offset by really delving deep in the game's mechanics to help you overcome this. Of course, along with getting good. But many players will be turned off by the information overload that goes into that and will just opt for extra mode to get by. Funny that Stranger in Paradise didn't get an extra mode until the 3rd DLC release, so unless you're a hardcore player, it feels essential to make it through the tough difficulty spike if you just want to experience the story. The hardcore players are what the DLC is made for, since if you completed the game on story difficulty, you're locked out, since you need to play on a higher difficulty to unlock Chaos difficulty, which in turn unlocks the next difficulty levels for the DLC, Bahamut, Gilgamesh, and Lufinian. Now I'll be talking about each of the DLC's faults, starting with Trials of the Dragon King. It starts off on a strong note with its opening boss fight, but quickly devolves into a grind fest as you have to grind for medals just to get snippets of dialogue to progress the DLC. It feels like such needless padding for drips of dialogue until it unlocks the 2 other boss fights of the DLC. Even worse, since it's basically what you already did in Chaos difficulty, but now it's required to progress. Wanderer of the Rift thankfully doesn't have this problem. But unfortunately it has a far worse problem. This DLC reaches the apex of brutal difficulty with more damage sponge enemies and bosses that are capable of one-shotting you. The worst part though is that when you take damage, it also reduces your overall health and you need to buy a special healing item to replenish that lost health. This mechanic is similar to the health system in Dark Souls 2 where your health gets lowered in increments until it reaches 50%. Unlike Dark Souls 2, where it only happens when you die, this mechanic happens every time you get hit and doesn't have a cap at where it stops, so you could be left at a small fraction of health at a moment's notice and returning to the Rift Hub doesn't recover your health. This is such a frustrating mechanic with how it's executed. I wouldn't blame most players for giving up at this point, since it's a painful experience even with extra mode on. The 3rd DLC, Different Future, eliminates the padding nature of the previous DLC and is very straightforward with its design thankfully. 1 new dungeon, and 3 boss encounters. It is the hardest one of the bunch, but at least it doesn't drag out its runtime. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time for the opinion. Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is a mixed bag of things. It's a decent Soulslike that's fun to experiment with in terms of its job system, weapons, and abilities, and the story contains many callbacks to previous Final Fantasy games. However, the information mechanics overload can be overwhelming to players who are only interested in the story, and even then, the story doesn't really get going until the second half of the game. On top of that, the DLC fully expects you to take the time to learn many of the game's intricacies to make it through the harder difficulties, which may turn off players. Gamers that are up to the challenge will find a lot to love about the variety of mechanics available to them and can sink hundreds of hours into grinding for better gear and items to upgrade them. More casual players will get severely roadblocked early on, even with extra mode turned on, and will find the DLCs to not even be worth it. If you're a fan of Team Ninja's other Souls-like series, Nioh, then you'll find Stranger in Paradise to be an enjoyable experience, especially if you're also a Final Fantasy fan. Others may want to wait for a discount, since this game can be love it or hate it at times. And now it's time for my rating. I would give Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin these tickets to a Limp Bizkit concert out of 10. Thanks for watching, and tune in for the next Infinite Backlog review. If you enjoyed today's review, please check out some of our other videos and subscribe for more. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and our Facebook page. Once again, thank you for watching.